First, I should open with a heads up. I'm very tired. For some reason, my body decided to wake me up and keep me up since very early this morning. I'm going to play this safe and basically read directly from my notes. Not my usual style, but probably better for everyone. I'm Colin Gray. I'm a principal developer at Shopify from Ohio, but lived in Colorado for 11 years, now in Toronto, Canada. Kenneth, does that clear it all up? Are we good? All right. Today, to wrap up this excellent conference, I'm going to share how we are building the Shopify mobile app. This is the app that, this thing's not scrolling. I'd love to say, oh man, see, it's going to mess with me. This is the app that powers the merchant's storefront admin. I have been a mobile developer since more or less the start of mobile development. I still remember holding my first, essentially like a supercomputer, right? It felt like one, at least at the time. I know by today's standards, it's almost laughable, but still, I just knew I had to learn how to program on this fantastic device. The TI-80 showed up in 1995. Thank you. So yeah, for some reason, my ne'er-do-well classmate owned one, and he was using it to enter, I don't know, curse words in the program menu. But he loaned it to me, and with enough button mashing, I got it to print probably something inappropriate. I was 14. My long and continuing passion for programming was ignited. It's never stopped. From TI Basic to Q Basic, C++, Python at university, finally got my first Mac, started to learn Objective-C in 2003, learned some Java, blessedly brief, and then full stack PHP 5 and jQuery. If you happen to be a web developer in the mid-2000s, you probably share my unending ire for Internet Explorer 6. Never forgive it. I met Jamin and Gant and Todd and Mark through our mutual adoration of RubyMotion in 2012. Also, shout out to the RubyMotion community. It was truly happy times. Then Swift, later Kotlin, then back to web to work on React, and then in 2015, and then React Native shortly after. I share all this because this is the journey that I brought to Shopify in 2020. From ride or die native dev to deciding it is better to choose the best tool for your business. And that is, in my opinion, usually going to be React Native. At Shopify, I was hired to help make the going all in on React Native statement a reality. Through education, there's about 250 mobile devs, give or take. They're all at different stages of learning React Native. We're building tools. I do a lot of evangelizing, a lot of assuring people that our choice to go with React Native was not arbitrary and is going to work out. The apps at Shopify are each kind of self-sufficient. We do try and find ways to share and learn from each other. Let's see here. I started on the point of sale app. This project began as an early React Native experiment. We think this will work, let's see. We ran with it and kept running with it, and now it powers iOS and Android and our POS Go first-party hardware. With this experimental approach, though, performance was a struggle. The main screen is a grid of customizable buttons. This grid is paginated, and you can tap to hold to reorder them, and you can add new tiles. And for some reason, this thing would choke after you add about 50 or 60 pages with 2,000 or 3,000 buttons, which some merchants did. I don't even know how. Manual entry, okay. So it's easy for me to criticize these things now because it's been 6 months since I worked on this app, so I think even my own code from here is just awful. I'll never do it that way again. I'm going to do it right next time. It's going to be really good, fully tested, all that stuff. This app has a few interesting things. Has support for offline sales, so that meant that we needed a real database. We needed to sync that with a server. Keeping that in sync on the JavaScript, using JavaScript code would block up the JavaScript thread, block up the UI thread. So we reached for a native solution. There's a blog post all about this. We actually used Kotlin multi-platform for that. Shout out to JetBrains. It worked out really well. It seems like kind of that House of Cards thing. Don't pull that card out, but works out right. I mention this because I really want to emphasize that
business requirements should drive tech choices. We needed to write an Android app in React Native with later plans to port that to iOS. If your team doesn't have any Kotlin developers, you probably shouldn't think about doing it this way. And actually, these days, you could reach for React Native worklets from Christian Falk. That wasn't available at the time. The last app to be migrated at Shopify is the one I work on now. Shopify Mobile, aka Green Bag app, aka Mobile Admin. Huge native code base, 2 huge native code bases, about 80 plus developers. On the React Native Radio a few weeks back, we actually talked about this migration, the training, which we call the React Native Accelerator, and our brownfield approach. We didn't want to scrap the old app and do a full rewrite. That's right. We actually migrated the code. We didn't do a rewrite. We did it at one time. Getting almost 100 devs from new to React to shipping React Native app was going to require multiple strategies. The training, sure, but as we've heard, you only really learn by doing. So we also wanted to have sensible defaults in place so that people could easily learn from each other and over time. When all your high-level components more or less look the same way, it makes it easier to borrow from each other, mimic each other's good tech. As soon as I go off script, I was like, okay. Besides, the native apps had always had very strongly held opinions of how the apps should be built. It was called functional table data, and it was directly inspired by early experiments with React Native. Here's a tiny kind of useless snippet, but you could rerun this code with different cells, different sections. It would do a diff, only send the changed cells, very React reconciler-ish. We had a version for iOS using UI table view, and another for Android using recycler view. So everyone already had a desire for consistent code organization and having one way to do things. This suited me great, and it provided an opening to promote, as much as possible, an approach to React Native that attempts to set aside or delay some of the decision fatigue, aka when to memoize. Our approach had to embrace this sentiment. Not all fast apps are great. No great apps are slow. I didn't come up with this quote. This is from one of my coworkers, Toby Lutke. He's a Rails developer at Shopify. Nice guy. Other apps at Shopify had to chase performance, identify slower screens. Hopefully this is easy by measuring in production, which everyone's been recommending to you. I'll recommend it again. Then you have to find out why they're slow. Manual tracing, profiling, and then try and fix it. Maybe it's memoized components, maybe it's flattened hierarchies, maybe it's refactor your state. Okay, as we dive in, I want to do a few disclaimers. With more gray hair, hopefully comes some wisdom. Gant, how's that working out for you? Yeah. Me too. React Native is a tool. Xcode and Android Studio and native development are also tools. You must choose based on your business requirements. I'm going to harp on this again and again, not your own personal preference. I don't know if all this will work for you. Hopefully you'll take away some things. Hopefully you'll take away a lot, but I don't know. Performance is perceived, which is great. It lets us cheat sometimes. We can show some content and then the real thing. Hopefully you do that in a clever way. I'm going to say a lot of opinions here, but you should always be pragmatic first, and then be dogmatic. And again, I missed it, this damn thing. Also, again, I'm very sleepy. I'm so sorry. I'm curious if other companies have spicy opinions welcome. There's like these things we say at Shopify, and I don't know if they're universal. That's one. It kind of clears the space. All ideas are welcome. Say the thing. It's another thing we say. There's some other things we say, actually, I really like. Strong opinions held loosely, or strong opinions loosely held, and disagree and commit. So I'm going to say some of mine. Try catch is a mistake. It's wrong. It was wrong when it was made. It's wrong now. If you don't know, there's a thing called the result type. It's great. Cilantro is delicious. Sorry to everyone who doesn't like the taste of soap. I just like soap. Pineapple on pizza is not worth all the fuss. You either like it or you don't, or you're ambivalent like I am. We need to move on. Come at me. React does not make good on all of its promises. All right, there it is. There's the spice. So for instance, I think you all know what I'm talking about, but let's kind of get on the same page. Things like let it render or recommending to lift state up. I'll do an explicit example so we're all on the same page. Let's say we make a change here in the component tree, but we need to update the UI down here. So we lift the state up to the common parent, and now we're blasting a render down. Sorry, I'm losing my place here. To who knows where. So we put memos in place. Now all is well. Except, do we know if those components are receiving stable values? Yep, turns out our setter that receives the change event is itself an anonymous function that also emits a tracking event. So now we need to add use callback, not because of the feature we are writing, and that's the important point here. Some more thoughts. When are views cheap? Are they cheap at all? When is rendering cheap? We do know there's a rendering cost according to the number of components and component tree depth, but until we stumble on that cobblestone, it feels like rendering is just free until it's not. There's a fair amount of confusion around stability. When should we reach for use memo and use callback? I have to go over this a lot with people who are new to React, and I think of this as a pretty core, pretty important React concept. So this is kind of my interpretation of what it feels like to learn, to start a project, to start React, and you're chugging along, hackety-hack, you're building an app from proof of concept up to ready to ship. Our login form couldn't be better, but as we add more features to the home screen, as we add more content and spruce up the design, the app starts to lag. Button taps don't quite snap like they used to. This is the situation I wanted to avoid. In native development, there are some sensible defaults like recycler view, UI collection view. These go a long way to making sure that developers build it right the first time. We should reach for similar tools. I want something like this. We start in a good place, and we pretty much stay there. Maybe we even improve as our understanding of React Native improves. This is the goal. This is not what we get. I'm saying this is this is what I'm reaching for. Sometimes you write a program and it gives you help. Actually, I know that I think we've improved things a lot. Actually, I know we have because we measure these things. We measure performance in production. But it's not universal. We still have to focus on certain high-value screens, home tab, main tabs, that kind of thing. There's no free lunch, but we get pretty close. Also, these tooling choices pay off in developer productivity. So default to performance doesn't just mean the app is good for users. Removing decision fatigue is actually a really good thing for devs too. So I guess that was all my introduction. How am I doing on time? You know what? I'm the last speaker. It doesn't matter. And if Kenneth comes out here and tries to hurry me or shut me up, I will apologize and quietly walk off stage because I wasn't born in Canada, but it's the country I chose by God. And I stand by our motto of saying sorry when someone bumps into you. Oh, sorry. No, I'm sorry. Did you know that if you get into a car accident and rush out and say, oh, no.
I want you to know I can hear you backstage.
And so here's a fact I love about Canada. If you get into a car accident and rush out and say, oh, no, I'm so sorry. Are you all right? You are not at fault. That's according to the law in Canada because they believe in treating humans with respect and compassion. Big fan. So, performance by default is a strategy I've been promoting, mostly in the Shopify mobile app that I'm working on day to day. I would be remiss not to credit now and many times Talha Naqvi, our directly responsible individual for performance, who I will be mentioning many times. In fact, he has lifted this quote from me, but now that he's in charge of performance, I'm lifting it from him. I seriously feel like I'm quoting him now. It's like a weird, but I'm like, but I made it up. But it's him doing it. And actually, I stopped taking speaker notes at this point, so here we go. So let's see here. Measuring performance. This is a package that we made a while ago. It has lingered a little bit. We are now picking it back up. We're actually going to, fingers crossed, update it soon to use the Obrados? I can't remember the guy's name. He's got, it's like React Native, React Performance, something like that. Anyway, we're going to use his timing library to soup this up. But the marker view that it uses, it puts in a native view. That way you can track. Did I put sample code in? Let's see here. Print and next. There we go. I did not. So you can track when your view is rendered. You can also do things like once the query is done loading and you really know that all your view is there, you can show that. So not just the like how long to first render, how long to the user can actually do things that are useful. So this goes into our measure by default. You should be measuring in production. That's been mentioned many times. And yeah, get it in there. Use this. It's great. Tests on mediocre Android hardware. Hard yes to that one. When you are investigating, this is from Talha. I was like, what do you do? And he's like, you just print date.now to the console and you find it. I was like, that's what I would do. That doesn't sound right. All right. Another thing that we're going to do, and I think this is a great idea, measure and compare end-to-end tests. I would say pick one. Like all your end-to-end tests are going to give you hell. Pick one that is your performance test. Have it do a reasonable, like we want users to do this, measure the time. How long did it take? Send that to a chart. Watch it stay steady. Watch it plummet. You want as many kind of performance indicators as you can. I think state management is familiar to everybody, but I want to talk about kind of why we use it in this default to performance mindset. So of course, state management, well, I don't know if it's of course. The point that I see it is only update components as needed. I don't care whether you use observers, selectors, signals. They're all fine. It's a business decision. What are you familiar with? But the important thing there is that the change that happens over here does not go up the tree and render all the way down. It goes to the component that needs that update. Having a state management library in place also makes unit tests easy to write. Typically, you want something that has a nice isolated state layer, not related to components. You're not doing component mounting. You're not having to mock, just state. In my opinion, state management should be per feature. I'm going to pull at this thread a little bit. I've actually talked to a few people about the state management that we, I'm so sorry, wrote for Shopify Mobile. We evaluated a ton. I have a specific lens, and it's this last bullet point. State should be written per feature. Now, Redux does a decent job of this. You can have slices. They're all global. Not all features are global. If I'm editing a product on two different tabs, one product on one tab, one on another, that is at odds with global state. I have two states. They are both individual. I could put them on a global shelf, but I have, so I think you see where that's going. And then also, if you have like a login screen, again, it's not global state, it's this screen. So the library that we wrote, we call shared state. We have separate stores. Actually, that should say repo. We have separate repos per feature. I'll show some code to make that clearer. And then we have different ways of vending from a repo a specific state instance, which we call store. So they can be global, they can be shared, and that's that feature level. That would be, I have an edit product, and then I have like an inventory edit, and then I go back to product, and then I go into variant edit, and I come back. Those are all sharing one store. Now, in React components, those are not hierarchical, so I can't actually props drill very easily. I could use React navigation and send it that way, but now these are real objects with functions, so React navigation complains. So instead, we set it on the shared state shelf by ID. The next screen runs, it grabs the same instance, and as long as someone is working on it, that state will stay in memory, and as soon as the last one is done, it gets removed. So these are transient, but shared. And then, of course, there's global. That'll survive the lifetime of the app. I'm only referring to in-memory. If you want persistence, then we do that via middleware, which is also defined per feature. So this feature over here that's using middleware, if they remove it, your feature over here, which is also using a user preferences middleware, doesn't care because you've isolated your feature. This seems very kind of reasonable to me. But middleware is this historically like the whole app, and I've always thought that doesn't make sense. So yeah, these live in module, that's another requirement of our approach. So let's see, I do need to watch the time. Now that I don't have notes, I just ramble. Okay, so these live in module, that's a requirement actually because the way our app loads React Native, there's a good chance that you'll have two app.tsx trees mounted in memory. They'll be in the same memory space, but they'll be separate trees. And that's because we go from React Native to native, back to React Native, and to make that a little more easy, we just boot up a new instance of, it's like register app wrapper or something like that in React Native. Okay, so here's what this code looks like. A bunch of people were curious about it, so I was like, oh, I'll share it. We are actually planning on open sourcing this. I think it doesn't solve anything new. It's very Redux-like, except for this managed memory model. So you'll see a selector there. This repo is defined in a module. There's a lot of, it's kind of like a function that returns a thing. That's so that when you create a new store, it calls that function, gets all your stuff, hands that to the hook, or if it already exists, it can return the memoized one. In a component, I've got another hook in here. I'm going to talk about that. We vend a copy of the store. In this case, I'm using a local store. So this one doesn't get put on a shelf. It just exists kind of in local memory, and we pass it around with props. We can select values out of it. So we have local ones. These aren't not stored in memory, not stored in like global memory. They're discarded when the component's unmounted, and everything's props drilled. Shared store grabs it from ID. These are managed. We use reference counting, so every time a new component mounts that shared store hook, we increase the reference count, and when that hook goes away, we decrease it, and when it goes to 0, we throw that store away. Let's see here, screen ID. Yeah, so you're passing around a name instead of the store itself. So two screens can easily, no matter where they are in the app, can easily work on the same store as long as it's still in memory. You could also use a global store. So in our app, we use this for preferences. And this is like, it's so funny to me to present them because like here's a cool thing, here's a cool way to use it, here's another one a different way, and here's the one that almost all state management libraries work this way. One global instance, and it just is like, God, it tastes bad when I say it. Spicy. So I have a rules of hooks addition that I propose because I'm opinionated, and we enforce this as this default to performance, which is all hooks should return stable values. This is probably a couple more use memos and use callbacks than people would usually do, because you might be building a hook and you say, well, I know today, right now, I know that this function doesn't need to be stable. So I'll return it, it'll be fine. I say, no, you are in a hook. You do not know your consumer. You're a black box. You need to be well behaved. Hooks return stable values. There's exceptions, which is if you return like a tuple of some sort. I prefer an object tuple. And I say tuple, not tuple. I don't know which one's right. Does anyone know? I have no idea. Those, yeah, they don't have to be stable because then you're returning something like this. The stuff. Okay, yeah, you don't have to memorize that. But here, the worry is that by returning an unstable value, which is a little subtle here maybe, I guess not because it's giant. The map kind of jumps out, but we're returning an unstable value. We don't know the consumers of this hook, especially we don't know the consumer of this hook in a year from now. Maybe they're passing it to a memoized component that will never trigger that memo because this is unstable. We're mapping over the results. I missed a question mark there. Sorry about that for anyone who's tweaking because there's a missing question. No, actually, I think that missing question would be fine because the first one would return undefined, the second one, all right, TypeScript, sorry. Okay, so this is going to be a new object every time, easily solved, wrap it in use memo. Now stuff is stable, we're good. And again, I wouldn't require a use memo around the one at the bottom, though knock yourself out. They're pretty cheap. I actually did a test once because I was curious, like how expensive is use callback? And so I think I created like 100,000 in one component. It didn't matter. I was like, I'm not sure these are expensive. Creating functions is more expensive, creating objects. And so if I use like the same one, and they're all creating objects, so like don't go too nuts, but objects are worse than functions is what that experiment found. This is like 5 years ago, so take it with a grain of salt. So referential stability, I'm kind of jumping from topic to topic. All of these play into the strategy. I hope that's clear. I don't know which one you'll find useful, so I just kind of blasted a bunch of approaches. So this is a topic that comes up where we like, when is this important and how subtle is it? So here's an example that I was seeing for a while. We wrote a lint rule to stop it because this looks fine if you're kind of new to React. I've got a component and I want to just create one real quick. Now this is contrived, right? Because I don't have a lot of room. The real code had like if statements to like make this header in this case and this one in this case. The problem is that now function header is a new function instance every time. React will never think that that's the same component. It'll always kick it out and put in the new one. And if that's an expensive tree, it's going to throw the whole thing away and put in a new entire tree every time because we don't have the referential stability. So in this case, you can fix it like this, but just don't do it. So our lint rule is like, no, if you want a component, it's got to be in global state or global. Oh, there's a missing space there too. Ugh. Ugh. Get that out of here. Okay, so use actions. I kind of teased it before. This is another one that does a little bit towards that default to performance, does a lot to the developer productivity. I'm at the screen, I'm at a high-level component. I've got a button handler, and this button navigates, it does some tracking. Do I need to wrap it in use callback? Do I need to do that here? We put it all in use actions. This organizes all of our events. That's great. It's a place that if you're new to that component, you can pick up home screen. I've never seen it before. Show me use actions. I know that all the wires are going to come in there. Cool, here they are. Great, I'm reading the code, off I go. And everything in there that it returns is referentially stable. Maybe it doesn't matter, but it's very cheap to make this, the return value of this stable. So send is stable, and on backpress is also stable. The trick it uses is the same one that was proposed with useEvent, where on the way in, it picks up the new function instance and puts that onto the already existing object. And so the same object is put back, but all the closed over values are up to date. So stable by default, stable properties by default. So far we've got the store is stable, send is stable, and we have these nice consistent screens. We can now copy and paste tests, because that's what we're going to do anyway. And those tests are like consistent with each other. So actually that's a reasonable thing to do. And if we make one kind of home screen test spec like very full and tell everyone, this is the one you should copy and paste, it's really good. Then everyone will do that because it's very easy. And like your code looks like their code, so yeah. I think this value is self-evident, but people disagree with me? Too bad. I'm presenting. So this is what use actions look like. We'll probably open source this as well. It's like 20 lines of code. It is such a stupid little hook. And I was so surprised when I was like, well, this would be handy. Why don't we use this? And then like, it's like it created a new planet. Everyone was like, wow, we're going to use this in this one, in this program. I was like, okay. But as we've used it more and more, it's like, I was convinced of its value just for that kind of ease of use. And it's a place to put the code. It's like, where do I put this? It groups it all together. It's nice. So you create this send object. You pass it around. It is stable. So if you want to memorize that component, great. Now in this case, we've got like a view property that's getting in there. That one probably not exactly stable, but probably shouldn't be stable. Like it is a setting that's going to toggle off, and it's a Boolean. So that's going to be in good shape. So send all these callbacks. We don't have to decide whether those are stable or not. And then I'll get to a different example with store. And then when we use it, yeah, I think you get the idea. Send is cool. I've got no time, so I'm going to skip the demo until the end, maybe. Oh, I do have a note for this one. This one's funny. So I saved the best
for the middle, which is terrible for memory. You're supposed to put the most important things at the beginning and end. And I think I ended with what is basically, we're not sure what to do in this case. Spoiler, it's kind of awkward. I'm really burying the lead by mentioning flash list in the middle. But it's short. Use flash list. Full stop. Never use scroll view. Never use flat list. Huge shout out to Talha Naqvi for creating flash list. He was responsible for React Native performance in the mobile admin app, which means I get to do nothing and not worry about it because he knows his stuff. He's very good at his job. Thanks, Talha. And he helped me organize a lot of this stuff. I want to pause here. I added these notes this morning to mention some of the things that Ankita talked about this morning. I agree with everything she said about one thing, and only one thing. Spoiler, it's flat list. Don't use flat list. Use flash list, because it has a better name. She went over a ton of good nuance and information, and all of that information is necessary to become an expert React dev. I just want to reiterate that my goal is to delay the requirement to become an expert, but still ship an app that looks and feels like it was made by experts. Flash list is an easy way to accomplish that. I have 2 sentences in here where I just stopped writing. What was I going to say there? I think this was at 2 a.m. that I was taking these. Okay, flash list. Here's how we use it at Shopify. Most of this you can do. Oh, I'm out of time. Should I keep going? So most of this you get out of the box. Some of this we've done through some tricks. We have a component called lazy scroll view. And I'll tell you how it works. And I asked Talha, are we going to ship that with flash list? And he's like, no, because we don't want people to like cheat. I'm going to like put it in there. It's all you do is you take your children, you wrap lazy scroll view in a forward ref so that it's pass through. You grab your children, and then you pass the children directly to flash list, and then you just kind of pass through the items. So basically what you're doing is you're saying, here flat list, here's all the children, and it will do a run. It'll give you, if you've used flash list, it always spits out an estimated size, so you put that in. And then the next time, when it like knows how big your content is roughly, it will automatically only render the children that are visible on screen. So then you get kind of what you want out of scroll view without having to actually create like a data provider that maps. I'm like, I don't even have data here. So you can use static, lazy scroll view with static content, and it'll only render what's on screen. Because flash list is awesome. Use flash list. We do a thing where we put a lot of work into these builder functions that build view model kind of things, these cells, and it's not JSX, so people don't like it until you zoom out and realize this is still declarative. It's all the way back to that functional table data example. It just isn't JSX. But JSX is just a means to an end of having declarative UI. You can do that in a way that is basically a fluent kind of cell builder, which we have in open source. I don't think I have a slide for it. Yeah, there we go. Oh, UI table view iPhone. You may have heard of this technique from UI table view from iPhone OS 1.0, back when it was iPhone OS. So there it is. Pause so you can all write it down on your paper. Okay, this one shouldn't apply to you if you're using React Native screens in React Navigation. I was just talking to someone earlier today who's like, no, I have this exact problem and I'm using React Native screens. I know, I don't know how these things work. So off-screen screens is you've got tab view, one's visible, one's not. React Freeze from Software Mansion should also accomplish this. I mentioned this to Talha and was like, what are we doing? He's like, oh, we're not doing anything. I don't even think he told me that. I think he came back with like, we're freezing now with like this 20-line hack. And let's see, what did it do? He gave me some numbers. We can't use React Native screens because of our weird hybrid approach. So we noticed, and here we go. 20 lines of code, you wrap your screens in this little helper, and easy as that, we dropped loading of subscreens from something like 300 milliseconds to a single frame. I think it was more like 300 to 100. I might have been exaggerating here, but it was like, the difference between tapping and then tapping again because you thought it wasn't registered, and then that second tap would be registered, and then 2 screens would come on, and tap load, which is what you want.
Okay, so here's the awkward one that we don't have a good solution for. I was actually complaining about this to someone a minute ago, where if you're using, and shout out to Sergey Gavriluk, he noticed this and he was putting some hacks together to deal with it. So he noticed that in the Shop app we had use query and we had 3 different queries, and it was resulting that like first loading of the screen was 15 renders because each of these was a bad citizen. What's going on is that each use query is calling use state in a micro task, which means that each one renders synchronously. If you use use state and use effect, you'll get batched updates, or if you use it, let's see, in a button tap event, but if you use it in a timer or a promise, then it won't be batched, and that was going on here. So he proposed, I think, this might be in the code, to use this shim and like hack with use state. I kind of clenched my teeth at that. That doesn't feel right. I like this trick. If you haven't seen it, you basically kind of add a component to your tree and put work in there and then have a callback to get that work out. And it can render as much as it wants because it's like a leaf of the thing. It doesn't have any child nodes and it returns null. So it just has very little cost to run. So query would look like this. It's still a hack. So this is the one where I'm like, I don't have a good solution here. I wish hooks were composable in a way that you could kind of combine them to say like inside this use deferred I could call use query, but we can't, so oh well. Okay, I'm getting to the end. What did I forget? Actually, I have a note card here. I can't read this. All right, inline requires. Turn this on. Is that a thing? No, Skia, that's what you should do. Skia isn't exactly, oopsie, sorry.
I see. Okay,
taking over. I don't think I've spent any more time. It's still at 0. It's fine. Skia is not part of the mobile admin's performance strategy, but that's because we're not like doing playful UI. If you're doing playful UI, use Skia. It's fantastic. Shout out to the crew making Skia. I get to kind of watch them and cheer them on. You know, they're like, we have weekly meetings, and I'm like, sounds good, guys. Ship it. Very fun. Thank you. So I'm Colin TA, Colin to everywhere, GitHub, SoundCloud, Ello, Denver Library, and of course, AngelFire. So follow me wherever you are.